Number 10. University of Idaho. In November 2022, the gruesome murder of 4 University of Idaho students made headlines across the United States as the hunt for the killer began. The crime took place at a small off-campus apartment in Moscow, Idaho. The victims were all young adults named Kaylee Consalves, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, and Madison Mogan. There were also 2 other roommates on the property at the time of the murders, but they were unharmed. It took investigators over a month to narrow down a suspect. They quickly learned that a white Hyundai Elantra was near the crime scene around the same time the killings happened, but authorities struggled to find the owner. Eventually, they were able to match 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger's DNA to some samples taken from the apartment. By comparing the evidence to DNA on genealogical databases, investigators found a family member who matched. Then, by process of elimination, Kohberger became the primary suspect. To make himself more suspicious, Kohberger had already fled the state by the time police were onto him. He'd driven the Hyundai all the way to Pennsylvania before Christmas. When he was finally caught and arrested, he didn't reveal anything about the case. Kohberger was taken into custody in his home state, but was quickly extradited back to Idaho to face charges. The man was apparently pursuing a PhD in criminology at Washington State University, which is less than half an hour's journey from the University of Idaho. Kohberger has also been linked to a study online seeking knowledge on the thoughts and emotions that influence criminal decisions during crimes. Considering the man has been accused of 4 murders, this is incredibly strange. It's possible that he was trying to better understand his own complex homicidal tendencies. On January 5, 2023, Kohberger appeared in Moscow's Latol County District Court for a hearing. There, the judge told him that he faces either life in prison or the death penalty if found guilty. Kohberger's preliminary hearing is set for June 26, 2023, and hopefully, justice will prevail in this case that shocked the country. Number 9. University of Virginia. In November 2022, a bus full of University of Virginia students and football players was attacked by 22-year-old Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. The young man has been accused of taking out a gun on the crowd and opening fire on the way back from a field trip in Washington, D.C. 3 people were killed, and 2 others were injured by Jones' actions. The deceased victims were all part of the university's Cavaliers football team. Their names were Deshaun Perry, Devin Chandler, and Lavelle Davis Jr. The murderer was also once part of the team, but only served as a backup player. Jones never actually participated in a game. While a possible motive hasn't yet been released to the public, a witness who was on the bus that day says that Jones only went after certain students. After searching for 24 hours, police were able to arrest the suspect. Inside his home, investigators found a large stash of guns and bullets. Jones is currently facing charges of second-degree murder, malicious wounding, and more. He will be represented in court by a public defender, and his next court date is set for March 30th, 2023. In a memorial service held at the university's arena, the Charlottesville community came together to remember the victims. Tony Elliott, the school's football coach, gave a brief speech honoring his former players, as many audience members broke out in tears. Number 8. Professor Bechtel. In 2004, University of Arizona professor Robert Bechtel made a shocking confession to his psychology students. He told them that 50 years ago, on January 12, 1955, he killed someone in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. The people he told didn't really know how to react. Many of them were just wide-eyed and shocked, while a few of them actually thanked him for his actions. Bechtel claimed that for the majority of his life, he'd been the subject of intense bullying. From the age of 4 up until he worked as a resident assistant in college, he was in a living hell. According to him, his abusers would often drag his dorm bed out into the hallway before peeing on him and the mattress. Many of his fellow students verbally berated him as he walked around campus, and sometimes he was physically beaten in front of crowds of curious onlookers. After years of this torture, Bechtel said that he'd had enough. While home during the winter, he got his hands on 2 guns. He made a pact that he'd kill all of his tormentors one by one. In an interview, he referred to his school saying, "I was going to stop it all by shooting up the whole place." Luckily, he didn't have the nerve to go through with it. Robert shot and killed 1 person, but afterwards, the man said he simply felt dissolved. Immediately after committing the crime, he went to the police and owned up to his actions. On January 6, 1960, after spending about 5 years in the Fairview State Hospital for the criminally insane, Bechtel was found not guilty. This ruling came after it was decided Robert carried out the murder when he wasn't in the right state of mind. Number 7. Michael J. Snow. On February 18, 2022, 21-year-old Elizabeth Howe was killed near the State University of New York. The next day, 31-year-old accused murderer Michael J. Snow was taken into custody. Investigators believe the crime was nothing more than a senseless act of random violence. Over the past few years, the suspect lost both his mother Paula and a good friend named Raymond. After Paula's death, Snow inherited her home on 50 Park Avenue. Apparently, on the day of the murder, Snow shot Elizabeth from a gray sedan. They had no known relation or connection to each other before this incident. Police found the woman and attempted to save her, but sadly, she passed away in the Canton Potsdam Hospital at around 7 p.m. that night. During a raid on Snow's apartment, officers discovered a sawed-off shotgun, but they don't think it was the murder weapon. They've since searched rivers next to the crime scene and surrounding area, but authorities have yet to find the gun that took Elizabeth's life. The killer faces charges of second-degree murder, manslaughter, assault, and more. He's pleaded not guilty, but if found responsible for the crimes, Snow could face life in prison. Number 6. VARUN MANISH CHHEDA. A South Korean international student at Purdue University has been accused of killing his dorm roommate. In October 2022, Ji-Min Shah, otherwise known as Jimmy, called the police to report the death of 20-year-old data science student VARUN MANISH CHHEDA. When authorities got to the crime scene at McCutcheon Hall, they realized the victim had multiple trauma injuries that had to be inflicted by another person, and so Shah, a cybersecurity major, was soon arrested for VARUN's death. According to friends of VARUN, the young man was having a good night playing video games with his friends online and talking to them through a popular app called Discord. Out of nowhere, they began to hear violent screaming coming from VARUN's mic. They weren't sure what to do, and the next morning, they learned of their buddy's death. Not many details of this case have been publicly released. While being escorted by police officers, a reporter asked the 22-year-old killer why he did what he did. In response, Shaw simply said and repeated, "I love my family." He later admitted to police that he stabbed his roommate with a sharp knife. Then in court, the man mentioned something about being blackmailed. We aren't quite sure what that means, but perhaps it's tied to Shaw's motive. His next court date is currently set for February 3, 2023, and it's possible his defense team may claim insanity. Be honest, if you were home alone and heard a bump in the night, would you leave your room to investigate the noise? Or would you lock your door and hide under the covers until morning? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Number 5. University of Vermont. On July 25, 2022, 22-year-old University of Vermont student Kayla Noonan and her friend were attacked by a crazed gunman. The suspect, Michael Dixon, forcefully made his way into the young woman's apartment and shot her with an AR-15. After killing Kayla and injuring the friend, the killer took his own life. As a community entrepreneurship major, Kayla had a bright future ahead of her. One of her professors, Dr. Tricia Schrum, said she was robbed of her future by a boy who never learned to be human. Kayla helped Dr. Schrum as a teaching assistant and often graded assignments for the professor. Other than being a model student, Kayla was part of her local Women of Color coalition. She had experience working in customer service and once held a position as a teller for Chase Bank. Those who were lucky enough to know her say that she was truly a special person who made people's lives better. It's a shame that justice will never be fully served for Kayla since Michael took the cowardly way out. Faculty members from the university and students will always remember the victim as a shining light. Number 4. Allie KOSTIAL. A marketing major student at the University of Mississippi had dreams of entering the fashion industry. Sadly, 21-year-old Allie KOSTIAL was never able to pursue her ambitions after Brandon Thiesfeld killed her. In 2016, the two met at the university. They had a rocky romantic relationship, but never officially labeled themselves as a couple. For the most part, it seemed like they were friends with benefits. Then, in summer 2019, text messages from the girl's Apple Watch were uncovered. They painted a concerning picture that Allie might have been pregnant. she had asked Brandon if they could meet up and talk about possible next steps. It was obvious from Brandon's side that he had no intentions of raising a child. In the chat logs, the young man clearly stated that he thought Allie should take an abortion pill. Brandon and Allie ended up meeting on July 20th and visited a secluded camp at the nearby Sardis Lake. At around 2 in the morning, a witness claimed that they heard several gunshots in the area. Later on, a police deputy stumbled upon the victim's dead body during an area patrol. She was found to have at least 9 bullet wounds. Brandon refused to talk with investigators, so they were forced to track his cell phone location. He was arrested at a gas station with the murder weapon in his truck. Then 2 years later, on August 27, 2021, Brandon was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder of Allie KOSTIAL. Number 3. MURAD DERVISH. On October 5, 2022, MURAD DERVISH shot Dr. Thomas Meixner to death at Tucson's University of Arizona. The killer had previously studied under the victim, who was the head of the Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences department. Unfortunately, MURAD was banned from attending classes and was formally expelled in June of that year. After receiving several complaints of threats that MURAD had made on Meixner and other students, the school kicked the 46-year-old man off campus. Clearly, despite their best efforts, this wasn't enough. Somehow, the suspect was still able to obtain a gun, and he managed to walk onto school grounds without being detected. Apparently, MURAD had an interesting past. His own father wasn't shocked by the news that his son had taken a person's life. MURAD is on the autism spectrum, and because of this, his dad says that he didn't have many friends. While growing up as a child, he refused to spend any time with people his own age. Then, as the years went on and puberty hit, he grew more and more violent. At one point, MURAD even tried to hit his dad with a crowbar. It's unclear if the killer has been sentenced yet, but he's currently in custody. The man's father says that for the safety of everyone, it's better if MURAD stays in prison. Number 2. AMARA MARLUKE. In April 2022, 19-year-old Portland State University student AMARA MARLUKE was shot to death at around 1 in the morning by 20-year-old former football player Keenan Harpole. Several students claimed that they heard gunshots that night coming from outside the dorm buildings. When police officers came to investigate, they discovered AMARA's dead body. The reason behind the murder is unclear, and the relationship between the involved parties is also unknown. However, Keenan Harpole is in custody even though he's maintaining his innocence. Those who knew AMARA say that she had a beautiful soul and was incredibly dedicated to pursuing her passions and being a light to those who needed one. Her father, Bradley, says that AMARA had a difficult childhood while in foster care, but as an adult, she worked as an activist to give a voice to the unheard. Harpole is facing charges of second-degree murder as well as unlawful use of a weapon. If convicted, he'll spend decades in prison. Number 1. Bryan Patta. 15 years after the death of Bryan Patta, 35-year-old Rashawn Jones was arrested. The man was once a teammate of the victim on the University of Miami's football team. The crime happened on November 7, 2006, outside of Patta's apartment. Jones allegedly shot the massive defensive lineman multiple times until he was dead that night. The 22-year-old victim likely would have gone on to play in the NFL and could have had a lucrative career. Before his death, Patta and Jones had gotten into a few arguments. At one point, things got physical with Patta beating up the suspect. Apparently, just 2 months before the crime, Jones made threats that he was going to shoot the victim. Sadly, these claims were never reported, so nothing was done to protect Patta. After entering a not guilty plea to the court, Jones is facing second-degree murder charges. Unfortunately, the outcome of this case isn't clear, so it's more than likely that court proceedings are still ongoing. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.